Regret my decision. What should I
Ah.
buy? Well played. Oh dear.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the campfire. There we go. Now we have cameras. Welcome to this week's edition of the campfire. I am one of your hosts, Lurkaderp. Joining me, the man to my left on your screen, Mason, aka Waydota. And this week we are joined by Lyrical, Llama, and Latrodectus. It's the week of the L's. Uh, This week's topic, we're talking a bit about what it takes to put together a good broadcast team, looking at casting, co-casting, and stats tied together. So why don't you guys up top, for any of our viewers who live underneath rocks and don't actually know who you are, go ahead and introduce yourselves. We'll start with Lyrical and then work our way across.
Hello, guys. I'm Lyrical. I do casting from time to time at a bunch of different places. Some BTS stuff, some stuff on my own channel, just kind of whatever is available and people want to look at. And yeah, I like Dota.
All right,
Oh, am
Llama.
I? Oh.
I think Llama's in the middle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I also am a caster. Similar deal as what Lyrical said. I try to stream as much as I can as well. And yeah, I think we have a lot of fun casting.
All right, and Avril, I think you're up last.
Alright, I am Latrodectus. I'm a stats person, and I like numbers and Dota.
She also likes spiders, as you may have been able
I
to
also
gather by.
like spiders. That is a peacock spider.
We tried to get the dancing version, but it didn't quite work out. All right, so kicking things off, we wanted to kind of start from the beginning of prepping for a cast. What do you guys do individually to prep for a series? What kind of things do you do with your co-caster once things get started? Is there any specific stuff you really need to know ahead of time or really need to have set up?
I can just start with this, I guess. It really depends on what the series is. And obviously, like the higher profile stuff, you do more prep for it than you would for other stuff. And that's just sort of the nature of it, because there's a lot of like sort of small tier stuff. I started casting in like an in-house league, and for that I didn't do any prep at all. I just sort of turned on my stream and started talking. But like, when you get to higher ones, the most important thing obviously is like learning the player names, positions, what their typical heroes are, and there's where Dota comes into a ton of help, or talking to stats people and having them set you up for stuff. And that generally tends to cover it. After that, if it's like super high profile, then you start going into like past stories and figuring out how the team has changed and things like that. But it really comes down to how much time you have to do it, and that tends to be like the big limiting factor, I feel like, for getting production ready.
Yeah, I feel that makes. Oh,
Go ahead, Avril.
I feel that makes sense. Definitely from a stats perspective, I know that it's pretty much impossible to do prep at a lower level. I mean, simply because there usually isn't enough data left or data available. Like even for some higher level stuff, it's difficult to find data on Dota for certain teams or players.
And Avril, I know you've been studying a lot of the Sud American Cup recently, and how's that gone in terms of doing prep?
It's gone pretty well.
All right.
I mean, of course, we had Deja's help, and she is fantastic at that. So she made it a lot easier.
For those of you who don't know, Deja is another stats person who specializes in being able to track people down by their Steam names and then somehow match to Dota magically. And I don't know how she does it, but it's slightly wizard-like. Llama, how about you? What kind of stuff do you do to prep?
Similar things. The only thing I would mention on top of that is I'd be careful about getting all of your info from one source like Dota. Dota does only do ticketed games, and it doesn't do ticketed games for global tickets. I don't know the proper term for that, but open qualifier tickets. And a lot of the times you can actually find out interesting things about teams by checking out matches that maybe weren't for as big a leagues, because sometimes that's where they try their experimental stuff, or even just checking over their open qualifier stuff. For example, like No Diggity ran strats that they then ran in Dream League that were very much stuff that they'd pulled out in open qualifiers to get into a bunch of different things. And so sometimes you have to look a little bit beyond the obvious all in one place thing. Another thing I like to do, but this isn't a resource you'll always have. But if you can foster a good relationship with team captains or managers or just somebody who knows the team well, maybe one of the players, and you can sometimes pick their brains a little bit about, what's happening? Do you have any roster shuffles? It's mainly really helpful around then. Or also just checking in on, looking at their previous games. What's that? You have 15 straight Earth Spirit games on that account? I guess that's what you're playing today if it comes through. So that can be helpful.
All right, good to know. How about when it comes to, like, if you know it's not going to be a solo cast, or if you know it's going to be a solo cast unless you do something about it, how do you go about finding someone that you know you could work with? What kind of things do you look for in a co-caster?
So different casters, I think, have different opinions on this, but I avoid solo casts at all costs. I personally don't enjoy listening to solo casts very much. I prefer casts between at least two people. I don't mind casts that have more. I know some people have strong feelings, but I generally prefer that there are more people. And for looking for co-casters, I'm going to imagine, again, it's very specific, but I look for someone who has similar styles, but also different styles, right? You don't want to co-cast with someone who has the exact same knowledge base as you. That can be problematic because then you turn to your co-caster and you go, oh, what do you think they should do here? And they're like, I think the exact same thing as you because we're both actually the exact same skill level. And you're like, that's what I thought. Shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like, I think one of the things I try to look for in a co-caster, someone with different knowledge base, but also then I want them to like have similar ideas of fun because it's never fun co-casting with someone who's like super serious if you're jokey or vice versa.
I love cast with more than just two people. I mean, who could forget I want to say TI4 qualifiers with Mott's Rune Watch 2014, I think it was. It was like him, Grant, and just like every other NA person under the sun doing like 6-person casts of like the open qualifiers, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely something to be said for having enough people. Like sometimes you can definitely have too many people in the kitchen, but I think that I'm a little surprised and also enjoying that we're experimenting a bit more with how many people we have in Dota. Now we're starting to have panels do the draft, which I think is a good step, and we'll see if it evolves from there.
I am very much in a different boat, which I think is fine too. Like everybody, I think, has their own style of how they feel like a Dota cast should go, and everybody has something that works best for them. I really don't mind solo casts at all. I did a lot of them when I was starting out because, like you said, it's hard to find people. It's hard to find people who are willing to sort of invest into a sort of continued work with somebody else. And I think for me especially, it was like, all right, do I want to try and sort of pick one co-caster that I'm always with? Because then I'm sort of limiting my options in terms of being able to cast everything that I want, because maybe they're not available. And then it turns into this awkward situation where it's like, all right, if I'm going to have one co-caster that I'm with all the time, or if I'm going to have multiples, what happens if they're both available? Then it starts to like have these weird situations where it's like you choose one over the other, and then that gets weird too. So I stuck with at the start doing solo casts. That only gets you so far though, because as Llama was saying, you end up in a situation where you don't have all of the knowledge. And I think that having a different knowledge base is really, really important for casts. And in a lot of ways, when I'm looking for a co-caster, I'm looking for like a heavy analysis person, or somebody who I can at least like, we have a different theory on the game or something like that. So for instance, me and Llama, good friends, we like each other a lot. We're terrible co-casters together because we have the same exact knowledge and we serve the same purpose.
And we like also agree on a lot of things in the game. Yeah. It's really bad. We'll be like, yeah, maybe they should smoke now, but like maybe if you're co-casting with someone else, they're like, oh, actually you should like buy a gem and do this jungle thing. But like Lyrical and I will both be like, nah, you should smoke. Like smoking's good, guys.
Yeah. So
smoking prevents death.
Exactly. So there's that weird sort of dynamic where you want to like, I think that it's really important to just have somebody that you both have good energy with and also have different knowledge from. So that's something that's hard to find. And I think that trying out a lot of different casters and seeing what fits. Because like there's the classic pairings, right, all across Dota, and when you find one pairing that works, they stick together for a really long time. And I think that that's really emblematic of like the most important thing, which is just synergy, I think, within a cast.
Yeah. I also think it's worth mentioning that depending on who you end up casting for, you may end up assigned co-casters, because that's
Right.
definitely happened to me more than a lot. Like I've had casts I've showed up where I was assigned someone and didn't realize it until beforehand. So as Lyrical said, you have to tell someone, oh, I thought I was bringing you on, but I couldn't. And then vice versa, where you're assigned someone who doesn't show up. And then you're like, okay, it's a solo cast, or I find someone in the next, like, 5 minutes. So, yeah.
So then adding another facet to the complication of, finding someone you work with to co-cast, how do you feel about stats being thrown into the mix? How do you feel about stats being given to you before the game, during the draft? How do you incorporate stats during the game?
I go ahead.
I was just saying, I really like stats.
We've
I
noticed.
feel that they're very flexible because you can, as you said, you can have people give them to you beforehand, and then that's just a little bit of extra knowledge you can drop. But even if someone posts a stat, and let's say you don't feel like you can address it in game, right? Say some stat comes up, it doesn't hurt you that the stat's there. It's not like you ever are forced to stop, drop, and address the stat if it's not appropriate at the time. And then if it is like really relevant, maybe you asked a question about how often does this thing happen, then it can be really helpful. So
and that's actually something that I loved hearing from you, that just because a stat pops up doesn't mean you have to say anything about it. Avril, when you're doing like stats timings in games, what are you really looking for to make sure it's relevant or timely or whatever?
My favorite thing is to try and incorporate it into the dialogue and the narrative of the cast. So, I'm not even looking for stats or for casters to respond to them. I just prefer to have them be relevant to what's going on and to what the casters are talking about. Which is another reason I prefer doing stats for multiple casters, because I feel like there is that dialogue that's present, and so I can augment that dialogue while not interrupting it.
So it's more like they're already having a discussion, you're just another voice in the discussion, but not necessarily interrupting things.
Yeah, I'm just adding context, and I mean that's what stats are all about. Because stats and casting, it's all about synthesizing information and presenting it in a package for the viewer. And that's ultimately who we're there for, and so that's ultimately who my stats are directed at. But I want it to be contextualized by the cast.
yeah, I think that's maybe what's one of the hardest things to do, making sure it is appropriate for where it is in the cast. So making sure the stats like come up at the right time. So
I would agree. I feel like stats play a really important role in a cast, and I think it's hard for a viewer or caster, anybody that's not a stats person, basically, to try and like really identify when the proper time is, and probably even for stats people as well. I remember like one of the first times that I ever saw it in a broadcast, it was about like Huskar at some big tournament, and it was like my life for Huskar or something like that. It was something that was using a line of dialogue and then also incorporating a stats. And I was like, that's so cool. It's like it's using a line of dialogue, it's creating more entertainment, more whatever the case is, while also providing information. And so I think that if used properly, it's really strong. It's just, I think, very hard to find that those moments. And I think some of the best stats people that I've seen is like trying to have been really holding back on some of them and then only putting out ones that are really relevant in the proper timing. And as far as getting stats people in, the other issue is that it's like I talked about, when you're trying to organize all these things together, I'm always going to prioritize finding a caster over a stats person, and I think that that's it's hard to sort of get all of those schedules working. Although I have found that stats people are willing to bend over backwards to be involved in anything.
Yeah.
They're really hardworking.
And small plug, as the leader of Standard Deviants, we do have an emergency looking for stats channel that people are welcome to post at any time and be like, I need stats this extra time. You're way more likely to get stats if you post ahead of time, but we've had people show up on 5 minutes notice. And Lyrical, you were also talking about holding back on stats. And Avril, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of, in a standard game, do you post all of the stats that you look up, or are there stats that go unposted, and why or why not?
There are a ton of stats that go unposted. Sometimes I look up numbers in anticipation of something happening, and then that doesn't happen. So then I get rid of the stat, or I try to look something up, and then I realize that it would probably take a couple of hours to find that information, and organizing it from all sources. So then I don't go with that, and sometimes I just write up a stat and I just sort of let it sit there until either the casters start talking about that or until I feel that it's become more relevant. But yeah, I would say probably 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 stats that I write don't end up getting posted.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, it's very similar with casting research too. You sometimes, you look up something, you're like, okay, I'm really excited. I know like how well this team does with this hero or something, or you did some research on if they win with this hero, it'll be like, you're like, oh, that's surprising. It'll be like their 60th win or something. Just like little cute things you learn when you're doing research for casting, and then you just never get to say them because of the way the game goes.
Yeah, I have this whiteboard here, which my wife has written her name on in funky letters. But when I'm casting, I tend to use that as well as like a big notebook. So I have these couple of however ruled whatever notebook. It's one that I used for college or whatever. I have that down here on my chair next to me, which is like all of the drafts, and then I have that one next to me, which is like key things right in front of me. And most casts, I use like one line out of all of that stuff. But then you sort of save it for next time, and then you can maybe say, this hero is run by this team like 20 times in a row or something, or in this percentage of their games, and then you end up going to the next game, and the team that you thought was going to run it don't run it, but then you say, well, these other teams think that this hero is really good too, so now I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but yeah, there's a lot of unused material.
So do you think that you have to try to keep statistics more general because of the fast-pacedness of the game? Like, can you go into like really specific things, like let's say that somebody gets a Battle Fury at 9 minutes or like something ridiculous, right? And you go and like you do some research and you try to find like what the fastest pre is, and it takes you 2 or 3 minutes to do that. So it's sort of been addressed by the caster past that point. Is that still something, as a stats person, Avril, is that something that's worth you putting out? And as a caster, is that something a couple minutes after the fact that's still worth having the numbers to back it up? Or is it too specific to be relevant later down the line?
It all depends, I think. I mean, there are some things which are a bit too specific, and then there are some things which are too general. I mean, you have to achieve balance. I feel like sometimes with things that are too specific, it can get a bit too esoteric. For something like a major item timing that is incredibly fast, or I feel like that is useful, and sorry, let me think for a moment. But other things, I mean, like too general. Like if something's too general, then it's just not. It runs the risk of not being quite as interesting.
Right. There's like a fine line when posting stats. Like there's definitely some amount of generality you have to have. So I'll have like backup stats essentially, which are things that are general about the meta or about a particular hero that like literally everybody picks, or like things that are about records that are unlikely to be broken or like really interesting. But then there's during the game when you're constantly looking up information to post, and so having like some general stats available to you is definitely worth it. But if all you're posting are general stats, that's stuff that the casters are probably already going to know. It's the specific and weird and random and numbers that you post that are a little bit different. You're not just repeating what the casters are already saying, but you're reinforcing it with a data point, or you're providing something a little different because looking up the record most kills by bounty hunter at 10 minutes is something that your casters really don't have time to do, but you can. That kind of deal.
But I mean, by the same token, going back to what I said earlier, I mean it's about making a package of information for the viewers. And I mean, while it is certainly useful to post stats with the intention of letting your casters know something, I mean, it's even if they might know it, if it's something that you think is interesting and not commonly known, I mean, then I say go ahead and post it.
I like that term, a packet of information.
We do have a question from chat, which is about the seriousness of stats. And I know Lyric and Llama have both mentioned earlier, and this is probably something that Standard Deviants prides itself on. We've been known to turn our stats titles into puns, like posting a stat about Spirit Breaker could have a title beginning to feel like a bash god. Motpax is constantly posting puns in all of his titles, and they're particularly terrible ones. So how do you make sure that both your casting approach and your stats approach fits the game? What do you look for in the flow?
This is like opening a can of worms here, but I think we should, because why not? It harkens to the bigger question of like comedic value in casting, comedic value in entertainment. Is the entertainment the like high analytical casting? Is the entertainment not necessarily spewing memes, but sure, why not spewing memes? Where along the sort of continuum do we fall? And that's something that I think it really is sort of a person by person basis, and it kind of comes down to the idea of like art, where I think the definition of art is like whatever works. Isn't there somebody who said that? I don't know. It's like where exactly you fall is whatever works for you. And if people enjoy it, then people enjoy it. And you kind of have to find that out for yourself, I think. I love the comedic approach to it. And I think that finding ways to make that work is like probably one of the strongest ways that we can look at the community. And having a strong analytical background is really good also. So I would like to see more comedy in every aspect of Dota entertainment.
Yeah, I actually really agree. I feel like people really like to deal in absolutes, but when it comes down to it, when it comes to casting, obviously there have been discussions about whether people can make jokes or whether it should just be all about analyzing the game. But it's something that's there for comedic value, like something I feel like this comes up every time we discuss it, but like realistically, the players who are pretty much over 5k probably don't watch casts, because when you're of that higher level, you are not getting as much value as like watching it on your own, moving the mouse, like moving the camera on your own. Maybe 5k is too low of a bar, but I think that's high enough. It's, a lot of people who watch this, they have it on at work in the background, or they're watching it to unwind in the afternoon. And it's just to get some Dota content for fun. It's not something where they, I think, are sitting there going, yeah, I really want to learn like the ins and outs of Ember Spirit because I know Eternal Envy is playing today. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes people just take it too super seriously. And when it comes to casting, I'm a big fan of the puns in stats, but also just where you can make a joke, as long as it's related, that sounds great. If you're getting too far away from Dota, unless it's paused, because anything goes in the long ass pauses that we get sometimes, I think that's fine. And as Lyrical said, it's going to be very personal, what different people want. Some people really do want cast to be completely just all about Dota and so on, but I don't know. I think that you can definitely make a joke about Dota and that's still fine.
I've always seen CAS as an entertainment first, and if I learn something, that's also great. Like, I don't watch a Red Sox game to learn how to hit a baseball better. Like, I listen to it because the announcers are, they've followed the team since before I was born, and so it's fun to listen to that perspective. I think if I'm tuning into any given Dotacast, and that's not to say that things should just go completely off the rails, but like I'd rather enjoy myself, like just like having a general pleasing, like people are having fun but still taking it seriously sort of atmosphere. And then, on those rare times when you get someone like Eternal Envy or you get someone like PPD to co-cast and they can just drop their knowledge bombs, like that just ends up coming as a nice surprise.
And I also think it's really cool when, what's the right to say? For me, some of the most enjoying casts is where you can tell that the casters are really, really, really excited. And I think that, I hate to say it, but sometimes you can hear a caster is just there because they were like signed up for this or whatever, but they don't really care about the teams and they don't really think this game is going to be good. And you can hear it in their voice that they are bored and they're just doing their time. And then it's like, wait, why did you even cast it if you weren't excited about it? Because reasons, but that's another story entirely. But like, you can hear that as a viewer, I think, sometimes. And that to me is the worst. When you as a viewer can tell that the caster is bored, to me that's like, oh gosh, that's the worst. So for me, above all else, like, if the stats are engaging, if the caster is engaged, all of that seems like it's really good.
I would say also that like finding ways to keep yourself entertained, to echo that point, is part of what casting is as well. Like sometimes a game is just a stomp and you're going to end up needing some comedic value in there because otherwise it's like somewhat depressing. And I've been known to laugh at my own jokes in the casts. There's a lone druid who's gone out of control. He kills somebody and I say, XYZ is doing his best Leonardo DiCaprio impression and like getting mauled by the bear, and then I laugh at it, and it's like that to me is funny. And then you end up getting a situation where it's like, all right, there's a little bit of levity to this really sad situation. Some people like it, some people really don't like it, particularly when betting is on the line. I've found people don't like you joking at the team losing, which is kind of weird too, but it is what it is. So,
do you take a different approach to doing? Well, we sort of talked about this, but to get into the specifics, if you're told that you're casting EG Secret versus the like Sud America Cup or something like that, not that you would necessarily do a better job in one or the other, but would you take one more seriously in your approach to casting, like less jokes, less funny, more straightforward?
So I cast a lot of open qualifiers, right? And I think both Lyrical and I, when we cast open qualifiers, you cast them out of your own channel because you're not working for anyone or anything. You're just trying to find an opportunity to cast, and there's open qualifiers. I'm usually really, really casual on my channel when I'm doing open qualifiers. Usually for open qualifiers, you're doing it through Dota TV, so you don't need to put delay on the stream. You can answer people's questions. People in chat will ask specifically, like, why not this item? Why not that item? You can actually answer. Because it's an open qualifiers on your channel. For me, that's the big difference. And sometimes I'll have my girlfriend co-cast if I can't find anyone because she's around, because usually open qualifiers are on weekends. But of course, for big game one, she is never having time, but like I would always make sure I get a co-caster who's like prepped and ready. I make sure my co-caster knows to swear a little bit less because I got a couple co-casters who just drop a lot of swearing, versus on my channel I'm like, you can say whatever you want, just don't be a douche. Like that's I think the biggest change, because I would say I cast really similarly for like regardless of how big the game is, just always focusing on what you can improve.
Yeah, I know I can say that there are some games where I'll definitely stat less seriously. Like for like you stat differently for
In-houses.
I don't know, a Canada Cup game versus a TI5 EU Hub game, especially if it's a Canada Cup game where the teams have been jokingly flaming each other all through lobby, and it's been up on the stream, and everybody knows that they're feeling this like bantery way towards each other. And as a result, like, that like the tone of the cast is going to be a certain way. So the tone of your stats are a certain way. And then you go, you've got stuff like what Nox and Scant were doing at TI and at the Frankfurt and Shanghai majors, where, it's very much like number, not even a jokey title, because that's what's being asked for. So I guess that kind of gets us into the next question, which is, are there ever times where you change your personal casting or statting style in order to match what's being asked of you? Do studios, do tournaments ever ask anything specific of you that isn't necessarily your baseline style?
I have a caster, have never had that.
I think that I've never been asked to do anything that or to cast a different way than I would have. I've been put in situations that I didn't feel like completely comfortable with, like when we were doing the tri-casts. I didn't feel comfortable with that just because I wasn't used to it, and I felt
couldn't
myself.
move the camera. Are you meaning
Right.
like BTS out? That was weird.
Yeah, like
Weird.
and awesome. Granted, awesome. Please bring me back. Awesome, but but it was one of those things where it was like it was very different from what I was used to. I also think that there's been like a couple of times where I've sort of I have changed my style because I know that there was something big that was going on, where maybe there's certain things where I would have like tried to toe the line a little bit more because I felt like it would have provided more entertainment value, but then I pulled that back in a more traditional setting. And that's I think that that's just all, again, sort of in response to what is going on around the tournament or around the game. But I think that I do change my casting style from time to time based upon like the bigness of the event. So yeah.
Personally, for me, I have to imagine my casting style changes all the time. As I said, I'm constantly trying to just look for ways to improve. And for me, as I said, my big stressor is like, since I care a lot about making sure that I can hear that casters are having fun, I care a lot about making sure I'm having fun. So that is a big thing to me. And as Lyrical mentioned, sometimes that's just making sure you stay entertained in a game that is like really hard to cast, because there are games that are hard to cast, be it because it's a stomp, be it because you actually like one of the teams and they're losing really hard, or you dislike one team and they're winning, a variety of reasons. So as Lyrical mentioned, sometimes you're in different situations, like casting. The other thing at BTS that I found super weird was, so we didn't have camera control because we weren't actually in any of the lobbies. So we were watching one of the we would usually watch the Russian spectators because they were really good. But a lot of the way I call team fights is I click around to make sure I've got all the info of like who used what spell in case I miss something. And not being able to do that, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I gotta learn how to shoutcast, just making sure I don't miss anything. Okay. So that was interesting and educational, and a new tool in your belt, but it was certainly a learning experience.
Avril, how about you? How about trying to kind of have you ever been asked by a caster to make stats more serious, make stats more fun? Anything that?
I can't say that I have. There have certainly been situations where I've switched my my statting strategy a little bit. Like, for example, in an 82L game, I am somewhat less serious than I would be for like the Sud American Masters, or I think I did a match for the Pro Dota Cup once. I don't know, but I mean those are like serious. There are people whose names I have read on Twitter and Reddit before playing, so I don't want to mess anything up. Whereas in 82L, it's a more relaxed atmosphere, so maybe people don't mind quite as much reading about spiders rather than Dota.
There was actually, I distinctly remember there was one episode. There was an 82L game that I ended up statting. And Avril, I was casting and you were doing stats for it. And
Yeah.
You specifically asked me ahead of time, what is the maximum number of spider-based stats that I can post?
I think it was 3.
It was, I gave you 5 over the course of 2 games.
Pretty good.
I had a good time with that. But I mean, I'm biased. I like spiders.
I love 82L so much. I don't know if I knew any of you at this point, but I actually was Dakota's Cottle Guy's co-caster for season 2 of 82L, so like way the hell back when. And it was just such a great experience because it was something that I had never gotten to do before. and probably for the better. I'm not going to do it again. But the fact that Jordan was really open just to like Dakota bringing me on for that season and just being like, yeah, this guy's never done it before, but yeah, good luck, we'll figure it out. And stuff like that is definitely a much more relaxed environment. I mean, we had his soundboard going because sometimes games lasted all of like 16 minutes. And
Yeah.
you needed something to lighten the mood when it was like 25-0, and there was really no way of coming out of it. But I do remember one time, just to talk about what Lyrical said earlier about being put into a sort of uncomfortable situation. So we were about halfway through the 82L season, sort of getting comfortable with just the style with Dakota. It was more laid back. These were, lower tier teams. And then he's like, hey, do you want to jump in a game this afternoon? Like, I need a co-caster. And I was like, yeah, sure, what the hell? So I jump in there, and it's like Team Secret.
Yeah.
And I nearly shit myself through the entirety of that game because I was co-caster, so I was supposed to be the analytical one. And
Nice.
for those of you that don't know, I'm like 3.8K, so the entire time I'm staring
Except on
at
Pudge. Pudge, you're like 6K.
all right, except on Pudge. Unfortunately, Pudge was not
Pudge.
picked that game. But like, I was sitting there that whole time, just saying, "Don't say anything stupid. Don't say anything stupid. These people think you're an expert. Don't say anything stupid."
All right. I'll say that's also why I like doing solo casts sometimes, because there's always the fallback of, well, he's co-casting alone, so give him some slack. And I'm like, signing into my other Twitch accounts to type that into chat. So give him a little bit of slack. It'll be great. I promise I don't do that. But yeah, it definitely got intimidating. I remember FPL when I first started casting that. I hopped into a game and FPL, super duper laid back, a lot of people that are flaming each other, and it was like Arteezy that hopped into the game, and it was like my first match, and I'm casting this stuff and I'm doing it through Ticket, so nobody's probably listening. But I remember as well feeling just like freaked the hell out, because it's really intimidating to sort of see these people who are, particularly when there's like a lot of people that end up like getting upset about about casters like talking down to pros. If you see something that's clearly a mistake, then you get into this spiral of like feeling like you need to sort of equivocate it and say like, well, I can understand why he would do this, this, and this because there was this going on, and then you sort of it's this need to try and please all the people, which I really don't think you can do in casting. You're going to make somebody mad, and I think that's something that everybody just needs to accept if you're going to do this. Probably for stats as well.
Yeah. So when you do get that feedback, and I'm not just referring to like the people like who are giving you nothing useful, only the straight up flame of I hate all stats, period. Won't reference anybody in particular here. Or stuff on Reddit that's just like, I hate literally everything this person says, or their voice annoys the shit out of me, which is like, all right, glad you don't like it, but not at all useful. How do you respond to legitimate critiques, legitimate feedback that's saying, I don't like this thing you do and here's why, and they have a valid complaint about it?
Or what would you say if that ever happened?
Usually,
Obviously, you guys are absolutely perfect, and clearly no one would ever flame you in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
but
Usually it really depends. I get a lot of feedback, as you said. Some of it I think is super valid. I actually have like a group of, I don't know, I would say I have a group of people I trust where like we hang out and they'll give me feedback. This is like because I stream sometimes, so I have viewers who will give me casting feedback, and they'll point out little things sometimes. Like sometimes it's really small. They'll go, you said, what was the recent one? There was one recently where it was like, you said a bit of a 14 times in that cast. And I'm like, a bit of a what? Like, and they're like, no, you just said a bit of a. And I'm like, I don't even remember or know what that could have been, right? So there's sometimes stuff like that where you're just like, okay, I said this, clearly it's my crutch word of the moment. I'll try to work on that. Sometimes you get feedback that is a lot more difficult to kind of deal with because someone's telling you they don't like you and they've got some kind of good reasons and they're like, oh, I don't think you know enough about this thing. So you just kind of politely say, I'm always trying to improve and learn more. But as you pointed out, it's like really hard because sometimes when someone says, I don't think you know a lot about this thing, what they're actually feeling is that you didn't agree with them on one point, and so then they're going to say that you're wrong. But most of the time, if it's feedback, I try to look back on it. I look back on the specific cost. I try to pinpoint what they were talking about, if it's more than crutch words, and fix it if it's something I think is worth fixing. Because sometimes people will give you feedback. Like, I get feedback all the time where people are like, you know, you don't have to be excited about everything. And I'm like, that's how I cast. I am excited about everything. Like, if I weren't excited about everything, we'd just be having a normal conversation about, like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm a hype caster. Like, so yeah, sometimes you get feedback like that where you're like politely declining to take your feedback because even though it's totally valid that you don't agree that I should hype everything, it makes no sense with who I am. So.
Yeah, I think that feedback is often pretty much just filtered through a sieve of flame, and that I feel like that's especially likely to happen on platforms like Reddit or Twitter, where it just kind of turns into an echo chamber a bit. Like, if I had $1 for every Nahaz hatred thread I saw on Reddit, I could set up my own tournament and pay Nahaz to host it.
And then profit even more from the future Nahaz
Exactly.
flame threads.
Exactly.
Great source of sustainable income, Avril.
Yeah, I think it's really, really hard to hear feedback, and it's really hard to like hear it, especially when you know it's right. For me, there's sometimes where I know that they're right, and there's been a situation of circumstances that lead up to it, and there's no excuse because, you know, there's no excuse. But at the same time, it's like, if you knew all of the things that ended up getting us to this point, like, you would understand why that happened. And an unfortunate circumstance is that there's no real first impressions in this industry or anywhere. And so you end up getting these people that then are looking for these things in your cast, and it's a small piece that maybe they would have overlooked before, but then they have this idea in their head of, this is something that this person does, and then they point it out every single time it happens subsequently. So you sort of have this like negative feedback loop of people disliking one thing that you did in one cast, and then that sort of goes in on top of itself. And then it's like, if this were another caster and they did it, they probably wouldn't be harping on it. And I think that there's also like a credibility issue where if you're a new caster to the scene, you get much less, you simultaneously get more slack and less slack. People don't expect as much of you, so you're more able to surprise them, but people also are less willing to admit that you have talent. Like they also, they're more accepting of your mistakes, but they also aren't willing to like give you credit in certain areas where you might end up being good. And it's not anything that's really like a big deal at all, because you just have to break those down over time. But it's a thing that's, it's about hard. It's hard to get into the scene, basically, is what it comes down to. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like I'm the opposite on feedback. I don't mind the stuff where like they're totally right and I look back over it and I'm like, I said that thing wrong. I should not say that thing wrong. I hate the feedback where it's like, that didn't even happen in the cast. What are you talking about? And like, then you think you're crazy because you're like, you watch it back and you're like, no, that definitely didn't happen. For me, that's the one which like grinds my gears. But I really agree with what you said on the whole, sometimes someone picks up one thing you said in a cast, and there was some guy who I was casting some open qualifiers, and I can't remember what it was, but I was saying some phrase a lot that weekend. It might have been, I can't remember. It was some phrase. And then he was like, take a shot every time Llama says this. And he would note every time I said it. And it made me so frustrated while casting because, you know, as I said, it's open qualifiers on my channel. I like to check in on chat to see if we need to explain something to people. And I just had to like completely ignore it, which is really hard. Mm-hmm. So I basically just took a second in the game when my co-caster was explaining something, kind of muted my mic, got my thoughts in order, and just had to really ignore it. Because like you said, Lyrical, it's just this negative feedback loop. If you focus too much on fixing that thing that you know you do wrong, sometimes it's all you think about instead of the Dota game in front of you.
Yeah, definitely. And Lyrical, you made a good point earlier that I just wanted to come back to a bit. because you were talking about how sometimes people don't understand like all of the circumstances that led up to a particular thing happening the way that it did. Avril, I know you can speak to this as well. There's times that happens with stats where you'll post a stat where afterwards, especially your fellow stats people will say, why the heck did you post that? That sample size is like non-existent. And you want to tell people, specifically because my casters asked for it, and I want to make sure that I am giving them the information they requested of me, even if it isn't necessarily like a sample size I'd give independently. If it's a data point your casters want, you give them the data point, and then they get to discuss whether or not it's actually meaningful or significant or whatever.
Yeah, it's ultimate. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Ultimately, it's all up to the casters. I mean, that's what we're there for. We're there to augment the cast and to provide historical context and give casters numbers. So if they want something, then we find it.
Yeah, fair enough. So in the same vein of feedback, if you're working with a caster or a stats person, and they do something that you know it's not necessarily not kosher in terms of, like they say something that's offensive or out of line, but more they do something that you know that they need to fix and you're in a position to tell them, what way do you approach it? Is it something you'd approach in between matches if it's a series? Do you wait until the end of everything so you don't throw them off? How would you approach giving that feedback of this is something you should fix?
Flame them while live.
Yeah, it depends. No, it depends on the thing. If it's mic issues, like I have to address it in game. I've done this a number of times with co-casters. It's really common. Let's say someone's roboting, or so sometimes I'll cast with Swindle, and Swindle will have like Chessie screaming his head off in the background because Chessie's one loud guy. Like he's just like you'll hear shit. And he'll be like, "Oh gosh, the agent's going down. Everybody's dying," and you're like, "Chessie, shut up." And Swindle will be like, "Oh shit!" Like I'll just tell him, be like, "Swindle, Chessie's getting loud." And Swindle's like, "Shit, have to adjust my mic because he's not paying attention to that."
Awesome.
So like those types of issues, you do actually, no joke, address live. It's like fine, I think, to just people get it. Like you've gotten someone who's pretty high profile or whatever who doesn't really give two shits about whether their mic quality is fine beforehand. That you address. On other stuff, I've worked with a lot of different co-casters. You quickly learn who is receptive to feedback and who isn't, because like Lyrical said, some people cannot take feedback. I've had co-casters where I mention, hey, maybe you constantly responding to Twitch chat during the cast isn't productive, and they get upset with you. And you just learn whether you can tell people whether they're the type of person that you can tell in between games. And of course, this does color whether you want to work with them in the future, or whether, after the end of the series, you maybe do a bit of a write-up. Hey, you could have sounded a bit more excited. One of my co-casters, we would cast together, and he would just sound super monotone. And he'd be like, I know I do it. I don't super know what to do to fix it. Once I addressed it with him, and we just tried a couple of different things and it got better. And so that's something where after the cast, we'd just be like, okay, how was that? And I'd be like, I think you sounded less like everything was boring. That's great.
There we go. That's an improvement.
Yeah.
All right, so we are rapidly moving towards the latter end of our hour of showtime, which is the point at which we go into the origin stories phase. And this is the part where you tell us a bit about how you got into doing what you're doing, and if you feel like it, telling us how you ended up with the name that you did. Although I'm fairly certain I know all those stories by now, I think our viewers would love to hear them as well. So Lyrical, why don't you start us out? Tell us how you got started and tell us how you picked the name.
All right. I was a chef at a restaurant that's about a mile away from here. I'd walk to work every day. I would come back home and I would play Dota. Actually, before that, I didn't play Dota. I played like Xbox Halo 4 or something terrible. But I also played StarCraft 2 way back in the day, and StarCraft before that. And then around a year and a half ago, I wanted to buy a new computer. I bought it, started playing Dota. After about 3 to 4 months, I was spamming Storm Spirit in my games. I was getting angry at teammates. It all went downhill. It was
God.
terrible.
You're the worst person.
It was the worst.
You are the
It was-
worst
it was
person.
awful.
Wait. Look, I have to interject. You're like one of the nicest people I know. This is like
I know.
everything.
It was-
I can't. I don't know.
I didn't have a mic, so I'd type it. I would type
I'm
it.
just mad that you were playing Storm.
It was
I'm just
really
mad that you were
bad.
playing Storm Spirit before you.
I know.
my God.
It was really bad. It was so bad. And then I joined an in-house league, and everything changed. if you are a person anywhere in the world and listening to this, join an in-house league. It will change your life. It's so freaking cool. People are awesome, generally, not always, but the people that aren't awesome tend to leave after a little while. And I loved playing Dota again. And then from there, I started casting games for it because I heard somebody casting my game. It wasn't a professional Dota. A professional Dota caster. I didn't get inspired to cast Dota because of the big casters that are out there, Toby or LD. I don't even think I knew who they were at that point. But I got inspired because I heard somebody casting my games. And I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. This is so cool. I want to do this. And then I started doing it from there. Slowly went up the sort of wire. I had a buddy of mine who knew IX Mike, and he got me into FPL. So I started casting. I started casting FPL games through that, through him, and then from there, Hefla TV, and then I talked with BTS, and then they brought me on from there. So it was just sort of this like starting, really not loving my job, wanting Dota as an escape, and then eventually it turned into something awesome. As far as the name, my original name was Lyrical Gangster, which I took from an episode of Psych, which I love that TV show. It's back in the day. For any of you guys that know, I think that was like the spelling. It was some episode, and like Sean turns to Gus and's like, "Gus, I'm a lyrical gangster. If necessary, I'll spit some smooth vernacular, and you can engage him in fisticuffs," or something like that. And so I loved that term. I took it, and then I realized that I'm never going to get hired for anything professional with that name, so I just dropped the gangster off the end of it, and that's where it's at.
All right, Llama, how about you? How'd you get started, and how'd you pick the name?
So I'm really lucky. I work in Seattle, and so I was at TI4 and TI5. And at TI5, I was sitting there in the stadium because for TI4, we had the floor seats, and I don't feel like they were there for TI5. So TI4, I wasn't super sold on it. I was like, I don't know. I don't really like big crowds. And then TI5, we were up in the like stands, and it was much nicer because I was just kind of completely surrounded by my friends. Because like TI4 was weird. We had floor seats, and like of course none of our friends had floor seats, but because we were local, it was like, oh, we can buy floor seats because it's like cheaper than everybody else's costs. And then it turned out all our friends were like, no, we all bought really cheap tickets, and we were like, oh, we're idiots. So anyway, we had a really good time at TI5, and I remember sitting there and everything was really exciting, and I was like getting really into it as one does at these events, and I was thinking, wow, I really want to be more involved in this community. I didn't super know how at the time, so I was looking around at Dota stuff and seeing what was out there and kind of seeing what different people did, and I just got really into the idea of casting. I was like, I'll give this a try, because it was something else where I was like, maybe I want to do cosplaying, maybe I want to draw stuff, maybe I want to, do other things, and wasn't really sure, and I gave casting a try. I got started with, I was playing in this Reddit Dota 2 league, and I knew that they were always letting people cast their games, so I just started doing that, and I started having a lot of fun with it. And so I just kind of kept going, and I went from casting the Reddit Dota 2 games to the Join Dota League games, because Join Dota League has a group where as long as you're like, hey, I want to cast, and you cast a certain number of games a league session, a season, that's what it's called, they'll let you in, and so it's really cool. And then I was like, yeah, this is really fun. And then kind of similar to what Lyrical said, you just stop putting out feelers. And I think my thing was like, I think it was after Lyrical, you were at the hub or something, and Gods was saying he's always looking for, so Lyrical's like at the hub, and then they're like, I've like spammed all the contacts I can find for BTS. Like all the emails, and then Gods like posts on Reddit that they're always looking for new talent, so I like spam them on Reddit, and then like I get this message back that's like, oh yeah, we're like really tired after the hub, which I definitely read as like we're really hungover, because like it was clear at the end that you guys had been drinking and stuff, and they like couldn't cast the game, and they're like, can you cast this game like literally in 2 hours? It was like I just happened to be up at 6 a.m. and I was like, yes, you should get drunk more often. But I don't know if that's actually what happened, but like that's very much how it read. Like it's very much how it read to me, as like they were super exhausted and had maybe gone out drinking to celebrate, and I was like, yeah, I'm here. So that's kind of how I got started.
And your name? How'd you pick that one? I have no idea
Oh.
how you ended up with the Down Under as part of your name. I can't possibly fathom that one.
Yeah. right.
So I actually used to go by Okapi when I started playing Dota, and nobody knows what Okapis are. So basically, all my friends would always ask me what it was, and then I'd have to explain every single game pretty much to my friends because they wouldn't remember. And then one of my friends was like, "Oh, why don't you just call yourself Llama? Like everybody in America knows what llamas are." So I did, and then of course when I signed up for a Twitch account to like cost out of it, nobody like Llama's taken, and like Llama Dota's taken, and like Llama Plays Games is taken, like everything Llama is taken, and I was like, okay, Llama Down Under it is. So
All right.
Is
And
an Okapi
Avril?
another Australian?
no, Okapi
No.
is the closest living relative of the giraffe. It's
Yes.
it looks
And-
nothing like a giraffe. It looks like a cross from a zebra
I'm
and
gonna
an anteater.
Google this.
But my sister is a biologist. So.
Interestingly, llamas and okapis aren't very closely related. But anyway,
Avril, how'd you get your start, and how'd you pick Latrodectus?
so originally at some point in the past, I wanted to cast. However, by demeanor, I am a relatively nervous person who does not like speaking in front of audiences. So I figured that would never happen, and I just kind of moved on. But my main inspiration for that was Sheever, because I saw Sheever, I saw this woman doing these Dota things, and it was awesome. But anyway, so after that, I started watching more professional games. And I started to notice the stat boxes on the side, and I thought that they were really cool. And so one day I was browsing Reddit because I'm a terrible person, and I saw a comment by someone, or by Moppax, who was a name, or which was a name that I recognized from watching stats. So I decided to message him, and I said, "Hey, how do I get into stats? I'm really interested in doing it." And he added me to the Skype group for the standard deviants, and the rest is history, I suppose.
Definitely. That was back when
Yes.
we had a Skype group. All right, and
Yes.
how did you pick the name?
Thankfully, I don't use Skype anymore. But anyway, Latrodectus is a genus of spiders, surprisingly enough.
A spider-related name? What?
The genus Latrodectus is part of the family Theridiidae, which are known as the cobweb weavers or comb-footed spiders. And the specific genus Latrodectus is commonly known as widow spiders, such as the black widow, the red widow, the white widow, the brown widow, the redback from Australia. And they're really interesting spiders.
They're really
for
good
a
at
lot
killing
of-
people. It's like great.
No one's died from a bite from them in like 50 years, thanks to the advent of antivenom. But yes, latrotoxin is quite potent. Yes, it's a potent neurotoxin. But I think that they have some beautiful patterns. Only the females bite, or only a mature female black widow is capable of harming a human, and plenty of other ones aren't capable. Like the brown widow is pretty much harmless, but they come in so many interesting colors and patterns. I mean,
At some point, we really need to get Avril her own spider-related podcast, because I think people would definitely tune in on that. Yeah, and I should have remembered that getting Avril started on spiders is approximately equivalent to getting Mason started on a 4-position pudge, getting me started on ergonomics, asking Llama about tea, or Lyrical. I don't know what I'd get you started on, but I'm sure there would be something that you will geek out about just as much.
But like,
that being said, that is all the time that you have for tonight.
Is all this going to be
Now
on
that
the
you talk about
test?
spiders more. Any shout outs that people want to make before we head out? Lyrical, any shout outs for you?
Yeah, everybody's awesome. They're all cool. You know, all the big casting people that hook us up with stuff, the community, you guys. Shout outs all around. I think that's what I'm going to leave it with. Everybody's cool.
Llama?
Except people that aren't.
Yeah, as
It's
always,
a good criterion.
Shout out to my girlfriend Amber, because she's always putting up with me when I'm like streaming for long hours or casting for long hours. She got she got stuck. We're moving, and she got stuck fixing the air conditioning there all day because I was taking a cost. Otherwise, I would have done it. Since I'm working from home right now on other stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I can do it." And then a cost came up, and then she ended up stuck doing the air conditioning for like 8 hours. And I was like, "Oh shit! I just thought you went to work." So yeah, shout out to her for always being supportive, and of course to all the people, as you said, all the community, all the people who come by and say hello. It's always really nice to see friendly faces.
Avril, anybody want to shout out?
I would like to shout out to my friend Nick and Rodrigo, and I would also like to shout out to my lovely cat, who is also named Amber, and he is just the most darling little cat.
Can confirm we saw your cat on camera before this all got started. All right, guys, if you want to follow our guest for tonight, Lyrical and Llama both casting at Lyrical Dota and at Llamadownunder. Avril, our stats person / resident spider lady, is at Latrodectus Dota. Your hosts tonight were Lurkaderp and Mason, aka at Lurkaderp and at WEH Dota, WEH Dota. We will see you guys next week for another round of Fountain Camming. If you liked us, give us a follow. We stream every Wednesday at 8 CST. And hope you guys had a good night.
Thank you very much.